Now, just to get started, today's workshop is an AI workshop for Crazy Egg users. It's going to be specifically targeted, especially at a lot of more non-technical marketers. But of course, if you are more technical, if you're a product manager in sales, a business owner or anything like that, I've designed this in such a way where hopefully you will at the very least learn some new interesting use cases of AI here as well. And it's specifically, especially going to be helpful if you're already a Crazy Egg user. But of course, if you're not, then hopefully you can still take some of this away as well. But regardless, so just to introduce myself really quickly. So, in case you haven't already sat on some of these, training webinar sessions before, I'm Stephen Go. I'm Director of Growth Marketing here at Crazy Egg. And what I say when people ask me what I do is I kind of do a little bit of everything. So I run the, digital advertising, be that the paid search, paid social, etc. at Crazy Egg. I do a lot of the positioning and messaging, conversion rate optimization. I run a lot of the analytics, A/B testing. I even work on the sales side and then the product strategy side as well. So the answer is really a little bit of everything. But the nice part is it means that I can both, kind of connect all the dots of all these different things put together. And at the same time, I'm pretty well practiced in terms of explaining different concepts to all kinds of people with different specialties. And to answer the question before anyone asks it, although someone will probably end up asking it anyway, is yes, we are going to send the recording of the session afterwards. If you are on the calendar invite for this webinar, then you will receive the recording of the session afterwards, although it may take another day or two. Now, just to give a quick highlight of some of the topics for today, we're going to talk at a high level introductorily about, what AI is and how AI differs from other kinds of technology, especially software. Some specific AI use cases for marketing, just high level, not even factoring Crazy Egg quite yet. Some prompts specifically to analyze data in Crazy Egg. And lastly, we're going to reveal a new Crazy Egg feature that we haven't shown publicly before. And, I sit on a lot of these kind of webinars, and, my complaint about most webinars is that most of them just a kind of bunch of executives talking a lot in a lot of fluffy, non-specific language about different trends. And it's those kind of sessions are never really helpful because they don't show me anything specific. And frankly, a lot of the time it comes off as if I'm listening to people who do a lot more talking about work than actually doing the work. And, I work with crazy users on a day-to-day. So if you've already sat on these before, I think you can trust that this is not what today's going to look like. We're going to start with a few slides just to kind of talk about some high-level principles and just the high-level ideas that you should be starting with. Then I'm going to be following with that with a live demonstration in Claude and in Crazy Egg. And if you can see my tabs above, I think you'll see that I'm already kind of opening up where I'm going to be showing some of this. Now, the first thing I want to start with, and again, this is already going to be clear for those of you who maybe work out of Silicon Valley and or the tech sector in general, but one big misconception that I think we need to start out with is ChatGPT was not the first AI software. It was probably the first time we started paying attention to AI back in 2022, but it was actually not the first one that was out in the world. And frankly, it was probably not the first one you were actually technically using. If we think about applications of AI that you've been using, these have been around for years. So if you've ever been in a social media feed, for example, Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, those social media feeds, even if the content's not coming from AI is actually already being used by those companies to kind of measure how many times you open a video, open up the comments, click the link, etc. And it's deciding which comment to show to you. And so ultimately, kind of in that particular case, it's already detecting patterns in what you specifically engage with when it comes to content and figuring out how to target content to you. If you've used Google Search or Google Translate, for example, these are platforms which basically, look at a lot of content that's available in the world. And in the case of Google Search, they're also looking at where people click, where people hover, and then using those to decide, okay, what is the best possible translation or list of search results to give. The same thing with Netflix recommendations and Amazon recommendations. Those kinds of platforms are ultimately just trying to maximize what is the likelihood that you'll buy something, or they're trying to maximize the likelihood that you want something. All the way to facial recognition, which looks at patterns in your face to try to figure out, what is the likelihood that someone is the person you're looking for. All the way to, even self-driving cars these days. Now, what do all of these have in common? And how are ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini different from that? What is the category that these are in, or the subcategory maybe that these are in that makes these different? ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, even Copilot, for example, these are what we call large language models. And you might kind of think of these also as generative AI, although, image generation kind of falls into generative AI as well. But ultimately, you should think of these as large language models, which are a type of AI but not the only AI that's available in the world. And how do these things work? It's really important to talk about where large language models come from or how they're built in order to understand what they're useful for. So to oversimplify drastically, large language models were built by number one, they read all the publicly available information in the world, including some that's not publicly available, right? So anything on the internet, they read books, they read articles, all the code they could get, social media like Reddit especially, and even conversations, right? Just give me the entire internet and essentially let me read through all of it. So effectively, a large language models mean you have like a data center and a program that basically trained by reading through all that information and looking for patterns in it. So this could be things like sentence structure, grammar, which words tend to appear together, or especially not just which patterns appear, but which patterns tend to be more relevant based off of the topic or a context. And then third is ultimately it's when you're kind of prompting, especially those large language models are trying to replicate the right or the most relevant patterns when given the right context and depending on what context is in there. What's important to note here is obviously is that not only are these essentially trying to replicate patterns, but that the patterns that they decide are relevant to give are very dependent on what context you give them. And obviously, a lot of the AI providers, like say an Anthropic or an OpenAI, they're trying to improve these models by making them better at creating the right patterns when given the right context. But at a fundamental level, this is what's happening. And maybe another way to think of this as well is to contrast this with what non-AI programs are, like all the kind of regular computers you're used to using, right? The difference between AI at a kind of high simplified level is non-AI programs must be programmed must with exact instructions for every step. So imagine, for example, if you're in Excel, right? If I want to like add together, like say a balance sheet, I have to be programmed, okay, add this to, and then add that, and then add this, and then add that. And an Excel sheet doesn't really know what a balance sheet is versus an income statement or any other kind of file, right? It just knows I'm supposed to add this, and subtract that. So non-AI programs don't really understand anything about the context. All they know is what code they've been programmed with, which steps they've been told to take, and then they're going to do the same steps every time, even when the context doesn't really make sense. Whereas AI programs are a lot more complex and they're a lot more kind of computationally strong. They have a lot more programming or memory and computation and things like that. And instead of being taught coded step by step and only doing that exact step by step stuff, AI programs learn or get trained in the AI terminology, and they learn by recognizing and replicating patterns in a huge amount of information. And the interesting thing here is that, they can not only learn by being programmed or by being told specific code to execute, you can teach them new patterns by showing them new information and then them kind of recognizing which patterns to replicate if you instruct them correctly. And so, with the right context data, you can really teach AI to replicate specific skills. Say you can teach them how to code, which of course is already happening in software engineering all across the world. You can teach them how to repeat a given task or procedure. So, for example, if I show them, how to do, data entry, say, oh, I have all these emails and I want you to enter them into a spreadsheet like this. If you simply give them examples of emails and then examples of the spreadsheets that I want to produce, then they can learn to repeat that as well. They can also be taught to replicate, say, creative writing styles or a artistic style. There was a trend a couple of years ago where basically people were taking, the anime style of Miyazaki, Howl's Moving Castle, or Spirited Away, or something like that, and to take a real photo and then replicate that photo in the animation style of those films. And the thing about that shows, right, is that the AI is not necessarily creating something brand new, but it's learning how to replicate a style and apply it in a new context. Same thing can happen with positioning and messaging, right? If you have an internal brand or a positioning guide and you tell an AI, hey, here's our positioning, give me more messaging and copywriting related to that, then the AI can do it and it's going to get better at it the more positioning guidance that you give it. And lastly, of course, is I mentioned earlier, right, that recommendation algorithms, social media algorithms, these are AI algorithms, which ultimately not only look at content, but then they look at the engagement you give on that content. And basically, they can look for the kinds of content and the kinds of patterns or kinds of messaging, for example, that maximize performance in the data. And so, therefore, we can apply that to not only create new messaging, but also to use to compare that with, say, data in Crazy Egg, which looks at engagement and conversions, and then figure out, okay, which messaging should we use so that we can maximize those conversion rates. And I'm going to show a little bit of that today. Now, let's also talk about not just the things you can do. Let's talk about the things you're already doing and maybe the AI mistakes that you're making. And, the thing is, I work in, a tech company, so I interact all the time with people who are, I would describe as pretty sophisticated, pretty, savvy users of AI. But I also talk with lots of marketers, people who, would tell you that they're not really good at using data and really are just looking for an entry level point. And so kind of here's maybe some points which I would give to that as well. Number one is the biggest AI mistake is using your LLM like it's just a basic search engine, right? It's just saying, oh, how do I tie a shoe? Or how do I, what vendors should I use for heat maps, for example? Yes, you can use it for basic research like that, but ALLMs can do a lot more, complex and answer a lot more complex questions. But they can also do a lot more work for you beyond just research if you provide them the right context data and train them on the right things to do. Another thing I would worry about is I would avoid doing is focusing too much on picking the right LLM vendor. I was seeing survey data from Winter, I think, this morning, which said that, a lot of marketing directors, the thing that a lot of that they're really worried about is that they don't know if they can't really know which right vendor to choose, right? Is Gemini right for me versus Claude versus ChatGPT or even Copilot? And the answer I would give is, look, if you use AI often enough that you can tell the difference between a Claude or a ChatGPT, you are not the target audience for this answer. But what I would tell most people is don't focus too much on picking the right vendor because the right vendor seems to, change every few weeks, frankly. Number two is that, that the differences between these LM vendors is not so big that someone who's just getting started can often tell the business can often tell the difference, right? If you're just getting started with a car, it doesn't really matter what model of car you're driving. You just need to start driving in order to learn how to drive the car. And once you get used to driving it, then you can start to learn the difference between the different models, right? Same thing is true of LLM vendors. Don't worry about Gemini versus Copilot versus Claude versus ChatGPT. Just get started with one. If you're already using ChatGPT for basic stuff in your daily life, start with ChatGPT. If all your colleagues are using Claude, start using Claude just so you understand what their experience is like. But just get started and then focus on which vendor is going to be right later on. One thing that matters more than the vendor, in my opinion, is not the choice of vendor, but the kind of model you're using. Specifically, I would say that you should be using reasoning models, especially for more precise or complicated tasks like analyzing data. A reasoning model, to put it short, is basically an an LLM model, which kind of does a few stages of thinking and looking for patterns before it gives you the answer. And it's something that's a lot better when it comes to analyzing data. And the thing I really need to emphasize here is that a lot of the time, if you're not paying for the AI model, you're probably not using a reasoning model. If, for example, let's say I go to the pricing page for Claude, you'll see here that there's a lot of different Claude products which have access to reasoning models, but that um, or enough access reasoning models that you can really use them. But if you're using the free version of Claude, you're probably not getting access to the best reasoning models. And the best way you can tell is, for example, if you scroll further down, Claude lists, let me show here. Yes. So kind of the go-to reasoning model for Claude right now is Opus, and you'll see that Pro plans and above on Claude have access to Opus, but free plans don't. And so if you're only using a free plan, then you probably aren't using a reasoning model quite yet. Same thing with ChatGPT. ChatGPT, if you're on the free or the Go plan, you have access to kind of the instant model, but it lists here, right? You have access to advanced reasoning models of GPT 5.6. And as a result, if you're not using the plus plan and above on ChatGPT, you're not using it out. So I would say is that, if you're trying to figure out if you have a team and trying to figure out which license to give them, I would suggest you or maybe someone who's really good at trying things out on your team, give them access to a reasoning model and then start having them play around. But don't worry about ChatGPT versus Claude. Frankly, you can probably switch between those pretty quickly. But for data analysis especially, you should really be using a reasoning model. Another AI mistake, and again, not to sound a broken record, is not providing the right marketing context. And speaking of marketing context, right? Marketing context might not just be, analytics data. It might not be, it's not just spreadsheets, but it could be something like positioning guides, messaging guides, or customer quotes, things like that. It could also be, for example, if you're trying to explain who your best target customers are or the way you do things internally, especially when you get in really big or really old organizations, you have a lot of processes where people just kind of know things, but none of it's written down. And, maybe if you've had the experience of starting at a new company, you might have remember the experience of starting a new company where the first 2 weeks, kind of, you have no idea what you're doing. You ask someone how to do things, and they say, oh, we do things X way, or we do things Y way. And you ask them, well, is there a document somewhere that just explains the way we do things? And they say, no, it was never written down. It's frustrating for you learning this as a new employee, but also remember that LLMs are kind of learn the same way, right? If something's not written down or it's not recorded in, say, an audio recording or it's not in a video, then they don't have access to that data and they can't learn from it. So if there's ways that you do business internally in your organization that are not documented, then you're not going to be able to teach your LLM how to do that. And therefore, what you should do is you should document what I call that tribal knowledge, and then you will therefore have access and the ability to upload it to an LLM so that your LLM can learn more about the way you do business. And the last pitfall I would recommend against is expecting LLMs to think critically by themselves. If I tell an LLM, hey, here's our positioning guide, these are our target personas, and here's the kind of value prop that we use, the LLM is going to be really good at spitting out more copywriting and messaging that uses that strategy. But if I look at that strategy and I decide this is the wrong target customer, we should be focusing on a different target customer, we should be using a different value prop, the LLM's not necessarily going to be able to figure that out for themselves unless you tell it to do that. And that's where kind of human beings who can make really big judgment calls, who can think disagreeably and kind of make a decision about like, here's why we're doing things the wrong way. That's something that human beings are still going to be really good at. Whereas LLMs are mostly good for, again, replicating the patterns and the strategy that you're telling it to continue to replicate. And so again, write those best practices, document those internal processes, even if you're just typing it up in an informal doc. Upload qualitative and quantitative context data to your LLM. Use synthetic personas, which is to say, like, have your LLMs talk like your different personas. I'll show you an example of this in a bit. And as a result, if you can tell it to speak as these different personas, you can use it to perform code switching and personalization for your messaging and your creative marketing. You can also use it to analyze patterns in complicated data sets, provided that you are actually giving it data sets that it can look at in detail. If you give it data that's just, same spreadsheets that you human beings are looking at, then it's not going to be able to really, show what it's capable of. I'll show a little bit more of that later. And lastly, producing creative variants fast for experimentation. If you're just asking an LLM to write a copy out of a box with no context or, training data, then it's gonna give you average work. But if you give it more information on different personas and you tell it how to personalize your messaging, but it can come up with really good creative variants that are personalized for the different target audiences really quickly. And that helps you iterate very quickly, even if you're doing very tactical variants, rather. And lastly, again, just kind of to summarize, right, is how can I use AI for marketing analytics? You can use it for market research, for all about positioning, messaging, copywriting work, ultimately, which I would say falls under the umbrella of what we call product marketing. You can use it for doing data analysis and getting recommendations, not just running numbers or creating charts. You can use it to create really quick creative prototypes that you can, if you can even really create something really basic, but you then hand to a human designer who can take it to the next level. And lastly, you can use it for personalization and personalized marketing. All right, so that's a lot of slides already, right? So let's get into the actual work, right? So let's use Claude for actual marketing, and let me kind of use a few examples here to show, what how you can really use Claude for this. But I've also tried to do examples that will work for any AI platform, whether that be, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, etc. But will probably perform best with a reasoning model. And the thing to note here is that, reasoning models, you will usually take a little bit extra time to process. So I'm going to be using a lot of time models that are designed to just spit out quick results. But you should be picking, reasoning models, especially when you're doing more complicated and precise tasks. Now, again, right, to reiterate, the idea is AI is trained to reproduce different patterns. But you can tell you can customize your answers and you can get it to produce different kinds of patterns based off of the target audience that you tell it that you're trying to create an answer for. So, for example, we're talking about what LLMs are, right? So, let's say I ask an LLM, okay, in 30 words, market LLMs to me. Give me a pitch, right? And I'm going to pick a fast developed model. In 30 words, market LLMs to me like I'm a 10-year-old. And so you'll notice here that I've given it an instruction, market LLMs to me, but also I'm telling it what the target audience is, right? And so it's giving me, okay, imagine a super smart robot that reads books, learns patterns, and can answer almost any question or write stories, all by predicting what words should come next really, really well. Okay, so very, very basic level, got rid of a lot of complexity, but it made sense for if you're explaining this to a child. What about if, for example, I'm trying to explain LLMs like a social media marketer, right? So let me copy paste this like I'm a social media marketer. And then it says, okay, LLMs are AI that understand language at scale, perfect for generating personalized content, optimizing copy, analyzing trends. So you'll notice here, right, is that, if I was using AI like a basic search engine, then it would just kind of give me the same boilerplate explanation of LLMs that it's giving everyone. But when I ask it to do the same thing, but to vary the target audience, then suddenly it's able to kind of take that context and give a very different answer that actually makes a lot more sense in the situational context. And lastly, this is kind of recommending specific uses. But what if, for example, I'm trying to, I have a boss who's an experienced VP of marketing, and I need to communicate my results in a way that makes sense for them, right? Maybe my boss is an experienced VP of marketing, but I'm not. I can tell an LLM that I'm trying to communicate to an experienced VP of marketing, and it will give that explanation. Now it says LLMs drive revenue through intelligent content personalization, predictive customer segmentation, and real-time campaign optimization, reducing CAC, improving LTV. So you see, right? Three different requests around the same concept, but three different target audiences, and it gave very different explanations. So you see here, right? This is personalization. And if you're trying to use segmentation, if you know your ICP, you should be giving the LLM more context in order to figure out how to communicate. So, and the thing is that, if you're, especially if you're a person of color, or if you've had to immigrate anywhere, there's a term for this, which is code switching, which is explaining using the same communicating the same idea, but changing the way you communicate it based off of who your target audience is. And the thing to remember, right, is LLMs learned code switch because they read the entire internet. They have a lot of memory. And they have a lot of memory to not just read through your instructions, but they can read through lots of documents and learn your business in order to figure that out as well. So what I would recommend is upload those product marketing documents in a project on LLM. And I'm going to do this with QuickSprout. QuickSprout is kind of one of our sister sites. It's a blog about kind of different business topics. You've often seen me do demonstrations based off of this. And so I'm going to do a quick marketing exercise based off QuickSprout, right? So what am I mean by product marketing, if you don't already know this, right? This might be, voice of customer research, say, transcripts of my customer interviews. It might be a list of my customer segments, jobs to be done, competitor research that I've done. SEO research is pretty good for this. Positioning, brand guidelines, competitive battle cards, even examples of copywriting, right? Ultimately, what you'll notice here is that this is a lot of written qualitative context, not just spreadsheets and quantitative data. But LLMs are language models. They can look through all of this. And so, for example, I can ask it like, okay, pretend you're persona X. Would you select me or a competitor for this use case? Or maybe look at my landing page. Would this be persuasive for this given target persona? What value props work better? And maybe which questions do you still need addressing? And maybe lastly, how would you personalize this page for each persona? So let's do this live, right? Now, one thing to note as well is this, you have a concept here called projects. Basically, a project is just like a project on a computer, but the difference being that like you can create a new project, give specific uh personalized instructions for that particular project, and upload relevant context documents for that project. So for example, for QuickSprout, I told Claude, QuickSprout is a marketing business advice website. Use the data marketing documents here to analyze what QuickSpout's audience is looking for. And I gave it additional instructions. Explain results like I'm a non-technical marketer trying to back my decisions with data. Ultimately, because I set up this project to communicate with you guys. Start by summarizing takeaways, listed in scannable bullet points, and then follow with an explanation of what that data says about my audience and how it backs those takeaways up. And then on top of that, I actually uploaded a context data file. You'll see a PDF here, but it's specifically, as an example, I really quickly created this product marketing doc for QuickSprout. And specifically, I gave it 2 slides on different buyer segments: entrepreneurs and small business owners, with a few bullet points on who they are, and marketers with points on who they are, right? That context was in the PDF that I uploaded to Claude and not in the instructions. And so let's ask it, look at quicksprout.com. Which of my segments would this perform better for? And how what should I optimize my this page for each of them? And I'm going to use a slightly more advanced model just so I can show an example of better performance, right? So it's going to be able to look at my website. It's going to look at the context and the instructions that I given it, and therefore it's going to personalize the results that I give it, right? So it's looked at the website and said, okay, QuickSpout's homepage is built for entrepreneurs and small business owners, but not marketers. It will underperform for the marketer segment. And the biggest opportunity is to create 2 different landing page experiences. One step by step, get it done track for founders, and one, here's what's changing and how to justify a purchase, track for marketers. Again, you'll notice that it's very much customizing results, not just based off the instructions I put in the prompt, but also based off of context I gave it about my business. And I gave it very little context, just my buyer segments, right? So what if I gave it more copywriting examples? What if I gave it um, website data on which kinds of segments engage best for my website? It can factor in a lot more of that and then use and have that background data in mind when it's giving me answers and analysis. So, so again, right, AI can understand qualitative context from your written documents, but it can also analyze your quantitative data, your reporting, data exports from Crazy, things like that. And the thing to note about this as well is that, I started my career as a data analyst, and the thing about most data analysis ultimately is a lot of this is ultimately just simplifying data so that humans can analyze it. Because ultimately, if you have, 1 million data points, a human being cannot read every single data point and then analyze it in depth to find the little nuggets. When we analyze things and look for averages or totals or counts of things like that, we are simplifying data so that a human being can understand what's happening at a high level. But when you simplify data, you get rid of all the nuance, all the complexity, that might find little opportunities in it. Human beings can't handle that data analysis and all that information, but an AI can. And so what we've done at Crazy Egg is not just to provide that kind of reporting for humans in terms of traffic reporting, heat maps, session recordings, etc. But we've also created optimized data exports so that AI can really get in depth and look for those little nuggets. And if you've used AI exports or even AI analysis summaries on Crazy, then you've already seen examples of the analysis that this can produce. This is the kind of data refactoring and optimization that powers AI analysis and recordings to watch. So, for example, if I go into a little bit earlier than that, but if I go into, for example, key maps, right? And I'm in the wrong one. So if, for example, I go into, let's say, recordings page, right? And I like look at AI analysis here. When I click generate analysis here, what it's actually doing is going to be AI optimized data set in CrazyEgg's database, looking through all of that and finding all the nuggets of insights that may not be available if you simply look at the very kind of broad information, right? All visitors who viewed recordings also converted, but usually in other visits. That's interesting because I would not have figured that out if I was just looking at how many converted in the same session. I would also have not been something I noticed if I wasn't looking at conversion data, if I was only looking at the click and scroll data. But what's nice is that AI can not just look at all the detail, but can look for trends that I don't already know to look for, so that it can surface interesting trends that I wasn't already looking at. And that's what makes AI analysis really powerful, and that's what makes an AI optimized data set really powerful as well. And so you can export these data sets in an AI optimized format. If you go to web analytics, for example, and maybe I'm going to go to another domain really quickly. But if I go to web analytics, for example, and I click export, there's an export to AI tools option, which is available for paid customers, which gives you that deeper analysis data for your web analytics. If I go to heat maps and I open up a given heat map, or I go to recordings, for example, right? If I'm in heat maps, then if you have the AI exports feature enabled in your account, you can go to the top right, click export, and then when you export it, make sure that this yes export JSON file option is ticked off. Would you like to export a raw JSON file for use with AI? And enable that. If, for example, if you want, you can use recordings you should watch in Crazy. But if I click into the recordings player and I want AI to help analyze a recording for me, go to the right and click this export to AI tools option, and you will download it that way as well. So that's how you access that data directly within Crazy as well. Now, let's analyze these in Claude, right? Because of course I just showed you how to analyze it, but we've talked about in the past that you can analyze it. Let's show an example, right? So, right now, if you don't have access to the AI export, you get a kind of baseline web analytics export in the version of an Excel sheet, and you can analyze basic Excel documents in AI as well, right? So let's say, for example, that I want to upload this basic Excel file, and I already have it right here. I can upload that Excel file. And it's really just going to be kind of a compilation of like the different, segments which are available on your dashboard. It's going to go through and then pull in information from other people who figured out how to analyze Excel files. And it's going to go and analyze all of this data for you. And it's giving me key takeaways. Okay, 7,000 total unique visitors, two clear spikes. And it's writing a lot of this out for me, right? And it's giving me a lot of this insights as well. But I mentioned that there's a JSON file, right, which gives richer information and which is designed for AI to perform richer data analysis. So what you can actually do is you can actually upload two different files and ask AI not just to analyze the data, but to tell it that these are two different data files. Ask it, do you learn anything new? And to contrast the insights you can obtain from each file. So let's show an example of that, right? Let's upload the JSON version of this and ask it to analyze it. And so what it's basically able to do is it can not only look at Excel files, it can look at PDFs, it can look at JSON files, it can probably look at your PowerPoint files and other things like that as well. But ultimately being that AI can analyze a lot of different data types, but we've chosen this particular format called the JSON because it's a lot of what rich data sets tend to be stored in as well. And we've made sure that it's something that can contain a lot of data, but that you can download to your device really quickly without taking up too much memory. And so you'll see here, right? Live example. Claude says the JSON export is far richer. It includes per segment engagement metrics for every dimension, and it doesn't truncate the top metrics, right? And so as a result, it's able to describe which data is available in the new file that is not in the previous file, and it's going to be able to analyze that data for you. So that's really helpful for web analytics. And then, of course, I can not just analyze it, ask it to perform insights. If you're using a reasoning model, you can also ask it to generate charts or generate tables or produce other reports for you, which can help to automate the initial work of analyzing data. Now let's do some analysis of recording, right? So I, recently went to a particular recording, right? So a recording is going to be not just, it's not just going to be a video, but it's going to be include a lot of information on, say, oh, what are the different, actions that each visitor took with timestamps, and when did they convert, and when did they click? And when we format the data, it actually for the AI, it actually looks kind of in this like very raw format right here. When I upload that, let's create a new chat and let's upload the recording example. And I ask it, that's the old one. Okay, help me understand this data from a website session recording. What does the user do? What are they looking for? And where is their friction? And when I ask it, it's able to look in detail, not just at all of this, but specifically to pull out nuggets, right? And so, it's able to kind of analyze this and give a lot of the insights in human terms. Now it's gonna take another second, but but the thing I mentioned earlier, right, is I can not only ask it questions, but I can ask follow-up questions based on the results it's already given me. So, for example, it's given me, okay, what happened in this session? 5.6 minutes. It's giving me a kind of human description, which I can then say present to my boss or to my colleagues, and it can then also, based off of context, try to infer what this visitor was working on or looking for, not just what they did. And for example, let me ask a follow-up question, right? Give me a scannable timeline of interactions with annotations. Asking a follow-up question, but using the same data. And what you remember is when I ask follow-up questions, the AI can actually remember all of the specific questions and results it gave you specifically as additional context, so that it can refer to the right thing. So you'll see here it knows to use that same session recording, but now it's giving me a table of each action with a bit more detail than Crazy Egg shows natively, and it's giving me additional annotations. So again, right, you can AI is not one of those things where, you should only touch it if you've been trained how to do it. It can figure out what you're looking for if you simply describe what it is you're looking for. And then it will be able to infer it because ultimately it's able to infer a pattern instead of having you give it code to specifically execute upon. So please don't be scared of it because you haven't been trained on it. And lastly, okay, so here's a kind of one out of left field is I am going to ask Ben a question not related to quantitative data so much as qualitative data, right? What segment or persona might this user be? Based on behavior alone, it's inferred a likely persona, which is an early stage content and small business builder. And what this suggests for segmentation is top of funnel awareness stage and a content consumer, right? So ultimately now we're not just going from data analysis, but we're able to take insights from data analysis and put that into customer research. And if you ask the right questions, you can take learnings from customer research and try to construct experiments and analysis based off of that as well. Now, I know for a lot of you, the most frequent thing I get asked about is heat maps, right? So let's do some analysis for heat maps. I'm going to take the heat map export that I exported a couple days ago, and I downloaded it right here. And I asked, and I'm going to ask this heat map. Okay, AI wrapper, please analyze this website heat map data. What content gets engagement? What do users convert? Where's the friction? And what optimizations to make to the page design? You'll notice here that I'm not kind of leading it to tell me exactly what I want to hear. I'm just asking it open-ended questions, but I'm giving it specific kinds of insights and kinds of metrics to be focusing on. And so now it's going through a lot of this data, which is not does not look like heat map. It actually looks a lot more like this. But ultimately just a very long file, as you can see from the scroll here, optimized for AI to analyze. And now it's able to analyze not just all the clicks or the scrolls, it can read the copywriting and the images on the page, and it can even look at which conversion events that visitors to this page took in potentially not just this session, but other sessions as well. And so while it's running that, right, let's think about like for analysis can form, right? So now if especially if you're using a reasoning model, which we're kind of like using a bit more of now, it's going to kind of give you progress updates on all the work that it's doing to analyze this data. So you'll see here, right? Let me go get all the goals and check the elements section for positional layout data, and then analyze a lot of this as well. And the more complex the model, the more complex the data, the more complex the instructions, it'll take a little bit longer. So maybe, I'm doing, in case if it's not already clear, I'm trying to actually do a live example of this. So which gives me potential to make a mistake. But you'll see here that these are real life examples, right? But you can ask it to analyze website data. You can tell it to give more inferences about your buyer segments. You can even ask it to create an A/B testing plan for optimizing a given page. So for those of you who are doing more CRO or A/B testing or even CTA work, then this is something that you can use to create an A/B testing plan. And lastly, you can actually even create it to design a new page variant based off of specific recommendations. And that's something that's going to be really powerful, right? Okay, so it finished running. And now it's telling me what's getting engagement, what the real friction is, and lastly, a list of recommended optimizations. And now, of course, I imagine for those of you who want to see the A/B testing plan option. So let's get that A/B testing plan option, especially now that it's done a lot of the initial analysis. So now it can just kind of put that plan together and format it with a ranking, right? So while it's running, okay. So so I just gave a live example, and what are some of the key tips for beta data analysis here, right? Number one is upload your marketing docs as context data beforehand so that it knows who your target segments are and knows what analysis you're kind of looking for. Use a reasoning model, especially for more complicated tasks like data analysis. Tell the AI how technical or detailed you want the analysis to be. If I'm creating a report for a bunch of specialized data people, for example, that's one thing. If I'm trying to create an executive summary for my boss, that's going to be another thing. Describe who a target audience for your data analysis is, but also if you're trying to create new creative or do new copywriting, describe your target audience in the instructions or in the context data. And lastly, don't what's called one shot. Feel free to ask follow-up questions and tell it how to adjust the structure and of your results because AI can remember what results it gave you or what questions you asked previously, and it can iterate upon those results. Like for example, right now, it's not just giving me analysis. I told it to give me an A/B testing plan, and then it actually spit this out in an exportable document with a list of optimizations, tier one, tier two, tier three, and then it gave me a list of suggested sequencing. And we can derive all of this just by looking at the heat map data from Crazy Egg. All right, cool. And one last thing to note, right? I mentioned about these AI exports. These AI exports are available in CrazyX Pro or Enterprise plans. But if you're not on a Pro and Enterprise plan, say you're on a starter or a plus plan, we've made these available as a discounted add-on, so you don't have to upgrade all the way to a Pro plan. So just email support@crazyegg.com, and when we can give you more information on that.